folks, welcome to Legacy IAS Academy. In this video, we will be discussing a current affair topic presented to you by your faculty Sushma KP. So what is the topic that we will be discussing today? Why does the Global Plastic Treaty fail again? Now first and foremost here, if you see this, whatever we are discussing as Global Plastic Treaty, the issue is not as in, yes, this is a present discussion. Last year in Busan also the same thing was held, but here also it failed. And now in Geneva also the talks broke down. The talks broke down on various issues. See, first and foremost, the entire world understanding under your, let's say, UNEP and all of those UNEA resolution PAM, in 2022 they decided that for the first time for the entire world we will bring in an agreement for curbing plastic pollution globally. And for this they wanted to make a consensus effort, as in, look at the keywords that I will use. Nothing is agreed until everything is agreed, which means every member party and also all the key in let's say what is the language of it, what is the legality of it, until and unless all aspects are agreed by everyone unilaterally, it will not be an accepted decision. So recently also again the Global Plastic Treaty failed to materialize because of certain issues. The issues as in certain topics which are not agreed by everyone globally. What are those topics? First is legally binding plastic treaty. Now first I will tell you these are the topics on which the talks broke down or why we could not reach a global plastic treaty. Then we will discuss as to which countries wanted to be legally binding and which countries are opposing a legally binding and instead want a voluntary agreement. Okay. So what are the topics on which the talks failed? Again, legally binding treaty. And because of one of the other more important aspects, we will be speaking about the scope, language, legality. The talks again broke down in Geneva, which was held in August 2025. Again the same thing like how it was in your Busan last year. The plastic pollution, they want to deal with plastic pollution in the full life cycle rather than just in the waste material sources. And the resolution which was brought about by 2022 in order to address plastic pollution for the entire nation did not materialize. It could not create a legally binding plastic treaty. Understanding? Now, what exactly is at stake in Geneva? Or basically, Intergovernmental Negotiation Committee was the one which led the talks in Geneva under your UNEP, UN Environment Protection. This was to be, if this was materialized and when and where it will materialize, this will be the world's first binding treaty, or again here the binding itself became a matter of discussion to curb plastic pollution. And also this would be dealing with the entire life cycle of a plastic. Now when I tell life cycle of a plastic, that is from birth to death of a plastic, or otherwise from production to disposal. Okay, this will be the first comprehensive treaty which will deal with the plastics. Understanding? Now, what are the reasons for failure of this treaty, or why did this treaty could not materialize? First and foremost, because of scope, legal language which was raised by many countries supported by India, and also the definition and life cycle approach. On what exactly we know that yes, let's say there is something called as a proactive group. Now let's say it is the most ambitious group, that is somewhere from your European Union, where they want to limit the plastic production, make it a legally binding agreement. At the same point of time, the opposing groups or more of oil producing countries such as your Russia, Iran, Saudi, all of these people supported by India and China are claiming that, see, if this is a plastic, okay, let's say reduction or something to deal with the waste, plastic waste treaty, then it shouldn't put a ban on trade. This is no longer, whatever you are speaking no longer speaks only about waste management, but it is entering into the trade realm. Here is this main difference is waste management versus trade restrictions. This is the ongoing and main battle, and this is why the talks are breaking down. This is the overall picture, these are the sub pictures of these. Production cuts, chemicals of concern, financing and technology transfers. Each of this we will be discussing in detail. Now we will see who are the bodies, that is two major blocks that we are seeing in this. First is the High Ambition Coalition, that is largely your EU bloc, led by more than 100 countries, or on this side which is led by EU, UK, Norway, Panama, etc. First and foremost, what they want from this treaty is to create a legally binding agreement, and they want to ban or restrict all the toxic chemicals, and also first main thing is they want to address the health impacts caused because of this plastics. For example, the microbeads in cosmetics, single wash or a rinse off cosmetics, right, single use plastics, and also let's say your single use straws, right. They want to phase out all this and also address the health impacts that is arising out of your plastic pollution. And they want to not just deal with the plastic waste, but they want to curb the entire life cycle of the plastic, starting from production till your waste, which means they want to put a ban on the production limit. This is the issue. This is where they are telling the waste should be focused. Your other, let's say this section of the countries. Which section of the countries? The like-minded group. This is the second opposing section is claiming that you are not speaking about waste management. You are, when you tell you are going to deal with the life cycle of a plastic, then that means you are telling about production. You are imposing a production limit on these countries where our development is getting hindered. To this we will not agree. And they do not want any production limitations. Understanding? Let's say India has banned its single-use plastics in India, but it is opposing to it globally. Understanding why? Again, because this is no longer just about waste, you are affecting the production limit. So, which are the like-minded groups? Saudi Arabia, Iran, Russia, Kuwait, which is backed by your India and China. Again, they are opposing because of production limit and product, let's say, phase out period, and also trade related provisions. Basically, they are telling this is no longer about waste management, but it is moving towards the trade and restrictions that it is placing the trade on the developing countries, and let's say in these cases India, China, Russia. First and foremost, when the draft was brought in, let's say this was the 5th time they were sitting, and the August 13th draft, they excluded the key elements and they brought in more of voluntary national actions instead of legally binding. And they wanted to bring off it like only a waste management treaty, because again the like-minded groups are not agreeing to this. Then again a revised draft was brought in on the early mornings of August 15, wherein they acknowledged about unsustainable production, room for cuts, but it remained very ambiguous. And another thing is, if you see, the so-called ambitious group is telling that when they are trying to bring these kind of drafts, it is defeating the original purpose. They are not bringing any limitations. They are just allowing it for, let's say, there is no limitation on production, means this will no longer be like a treaty, but rather more just a voluntary agreement. So they said this is subpar to what we have been planning. Whereas let's say the like-minded countries are telling this is a positive start. Now see, first thing is you have to balance out both things. Balance out your domestic concerns as well as your global concerns. Understanding? In this topic is where both of these people are not meeting eye to eye. Ambitious group is seeing yes only globally, but your like-minded groups are telling while you are considering global, consider the local economies, consider our particular national interests. Both of them are not sitting on tight with this, which is leading to the failure of global plastic treaty. So what is India's stance? First and foremost, the aspects which it has opposed in your global plastic treaty is production limits, because this says at this point of time the global plastic treaty weans off or steers away from waste management to trade restrictions, which affects more of your developing countries, and also it has spoken out against the phase out lists, which would again in turn affect the economy, and separate article on polymer supply, and also they want on equitable financial mechanisms wherein India is objecting on this particular front with respect to, let's say, your developing countries have to support financially to the developing countries to do this. Understanding? And first and foremost, it has spoken about economy wide implications, and also this production limit affects the right to development of your countries or growing economies. The finances and tech transfers are needed for developing economies to go ahead with this global plastic treaty. Understanding? Now, what are the major source of differences between your ambitious group and like-minded group? Let's see. First thing, when it comes to the scope, which means on what aspect of plastic waste are they looking for? Your ambitious block is looking for the full cycle, that is from production to waste, whereas the like-minded countries want to focus only on waste. The legalities with regard to the global plastic treaty, the ambitious countries wanted to be legally binding, whereas the like-minded countries supported by India, China, Russia and all, they wanted only in a voluntary aspect. In the plastic production, with respect to high ambitious block, they are claiming about the cuts, phasing and also phase out eventually. With respect to like-minded countries, they are opposing the production limits and also phase out. The chemicals they want to put, your ambitious country want to put a list of toxic substances, which means your like-minded countries are telling this would put restrictions on them and we want to avoid these restrictions. With respect to financing, they are saying a strong support for global south, but your like-minded countries are wanting equity based, whereas they are asking for non-equity based. Understanding? With respect to products, your high ambitious block wants it to be on the global list, and like-minded countries oppose for any universal list, again because they are telling this will be not fair to the developing economies. Alright. What can India and what in more specifically if we bring about, what can ambitious group and like-minded group learn about this and move ahead with this? First and foremost, here both of them have to see eye to eye on these products, which means there is a delicate balance needed between the domestic as well as the global protection. And also address the life cycle of the product without stifling the development, which means without hurting the development of the economies. That is what your like-minded economies are claiming. And also this should include finances and tech transfers like your like-minded countries, which is backed by Russia, China, India is claiming. And they want it based on differential responsibilities. That is again the same process when we said about equity and non-equity. The countries must shift from positioning to compromise, because if at all, what we started the video with, nothing can be agreed until everything is agreed. So rather than trying to impose on any country, you have to move towards a concept of compromise and make sure the next session be more inclusive of all the issues. Otherwise, this also will be another failed session in order to come to or reach a consensus for a global plastic treaty. Now see, first thing is, irrespective of what the differences are, yes, we do need a global plastic treaty. But this also has to come at a phase where it should not be a mode of imposition on any countries. And at any point of time, this should not be a burden on the global south, which are just now developing. Understanding? Let's discuss a possible mains question. Discuss the challenges in forging global treaty on plastic pollution. How can India balance its developmental needs with global environmental committees? Okay, commitments in such negotiation. First thing is, you will see about global challenges, conflicting interests, economic implications that you will see with respect to equity, non-equity, understanding with respect to tech transfers. Right. From India's perspective, you have to again balance out both development as well as environmental commitments. Like when we mentioned, India, within India has phased out single-use plastics, but has opposed for the same in the global levels. Understanding, and so this deal can be reached out only through a mode of compromise and differentiated responsibilities, which should be in the form of trying to meet and come up with a more sustainable global plastic treaty. Alright, with this we have come to the end of the content. If you like our content, subscribe to our channel, hit the like button, share it along with your friends. Thank you.